Hey everyone, welcome to the studio. I'm going to do a bonus video demo today. I'm looking for something to paint. We're studying clouds this month and I thought, why not just paint some clouds and kind of review some of the things that I've been sharing in my posts about painting skies and clouds. So that's what I'm planning on doing. I'm going to invite you along to watch. I probably will comment. I know I asked you last week, did you want to have commentary or not? And most of you said either way. So if I alternate them, that's probably a fair way to do it. So let's get started. I want to talk about the materials that I'm going to be using today. First of all, I'm working on a piece of sanded paper. This is the MingArt sanded paper, and it's in a nice gray. So I really like this paper. The pastels that I'm going to challenge myself to use for today's painting is Terry Ludwig set. This is the Red Rock selection of pastels. Now I got this Red Rock set several years ago when I was going to go out to the Southwest, and what I realized quickly is that it is suitable for lots of different landscapes or subjects, not just the Southwest or red rocks. Certainly can paint red rocks, but we can paint a lot more. So I'm going to challenge myself to use this set to paint the sunset. I did throw in a few extra pastels. I thought I might need a brighter light, so I threw that in. I threw in a few new pastels because those are always good to have. And so that's what I'm going to be using for today. Now let's have a look at the reference photo that I'm going to be working from. And what I really like about this is the drama of the sun has already gone down. It's a sunset scene. But I love the drama of the really dark foreground with the fading light, or that kind of that last bright light. And there's still some blue in the sky. So it's a really interesting time of day, kind of a cloudy sunset, I guess you could call it. So it's not a really bright, colorful sunset. It's definitely more subtle. But when I look at this foreground in the photo, I see that I can't see what's there. In other words, it is underexposed. So everything looks just black and dark. And then I say to myself, well, really, this is a painting about the sky and the clouds, so why do I have to worry so much about what's here? Why don't I just lower the horizon and just hint at some of the tree line? And I do like that there's you can't probably see it in the video, but there's like a distant, maybe mountain shape or hillside or something in the distance, and I think that will help give a little bit of depth. So I'm going to go ahead and do a very quick light drawing with pencil, very lightly, and I'm lowering the horizon because remember, it's about the sky, so I don't need to have trees all the way up here, then I won't have room to play with the sky. I do like this kind of interesting arrangement of tree shapes over here. I'm going to pull that down a little bit. I remember I said there was kind of a hint of a distant hillside, so I'll put that in. And then there's some other tree shapes. And when you are doing something like this where it's a foreground and it's not really important, you don't have to copy exactly the arrangement of shapes that are on your that are in your photo. This is really up to you to create a more interesting arrangement of shapes. So that I'm not going to copy those shapes exactly, although I will say they're fairly interesting. So sometimes you get a photo that actually has interesting information, and then it's okay to use. But if you have something that's, boring or too similar or not a good composition, always give yourself permission to change it. Now, when it comes to painting the clouds in the sky, clouds are always moving, so really it's a moment in time when you snap a photograph, or even if you're looking and you're trying to paint them from life. They're not, when you take a photo, that it freezes that one moment, and that one moment might not have been the best arrangement of cloud shapes. So always give yourself permission to rearrange those clouds to make a better composition. But in this case, and that's probably why I selected this photo, I actually really like how these cloud shapes are pulling down, are kind of pointing down to this area here where that kind of that bright flash of light. is, and it is slightly off center, which is a good thing, so I'll just note that. So I'm not going to draw in all of these clouds because they're relatively thin clouds. But some of these in here can be easily painted on top of sky color, but some of the larger cloud shapes I really want to make room for. So I'm going to draw in some of the main shapes. And again, keeping this idea of pulling the eye down through the cloud shapes. And again, this is just a very rough indication of where these clouds will go, and it definitely will change as the painting progresses. Alright, so that's the extent of the drawing. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to spend some time developing this foreground and kind of get it out of the way. Now, there's two ways to go about it. You could do your sky first, then come down and do this foreground, and a lot of times I'll do that because your dust will fall down, and if you have a dark foreground, it will get lightened by the dust. But I think I'm going to establish how dark I want this foreground, and if I have to come back and make readjustments or darken things, I will go ahead and do that. So I'm going to start off by using a dark blue hard pastel, and I'm going to just come in and paint in these tree shapes. Now, one thing that I want to keep in mind, and I've shared this in previous posts this month about painting, oops, it just dropped out of my hand. Excuse me. Here we go. About painting sunset scenes is photographs will often underexpose the darks, and it almost looks like black in the photo. And in fact, in my photo here, those dark areas really do come across as being black. But I know that I don't want to make it black because it would look flat. It would look dull, almost dead. I'm painting dark at the very bottom, and I'm leading up. I'm making a mark leading us up to this area right in here, which is going to be the focal area. So I know I'm not going to use black, but what am I going to use? I'm going to use dark, dull colors. Like I call these using your uglies. The colors that you might not normally pick up. Those army greens, those dusty violets, mousy colors I sometimes call them. So let's establish the one layer of dark. Now I'm going to go in with some of the softer pastels and add a second layer of dark, and this is a dark burgundy. One of the things that I liked about these trees is they had a very interesting silhouette against the sky. So I'm trying to get that feeling. These were a little bit more solid, but that's kind of boring. I think I'm going to break these up a little bit and give them a little bit more of an interesting silhouette against the sky. And then darken this foreground area. So that's 2 layers of dark. Why don't we add another layer of dark? Let's add a dark violet. These are all the same value, so I'm able to layer them using a light touch, and I get kind of more interesting darks than if I just went in with a black pastel. It would look dead. Now, one thing that's happening here, and I'm going to address it in just a second, is you can see the paper, tone of the paper peeking through. Now, normally, you know, that doesn't bother me if I'm having light, if say it's the snow or sand, but in this case, you see the light, it takes away from this being the dark foreground. So I'm going to make an adjustment in just a minute. Before I do that, I need to add a layer of color down here. So I'm using this dusty mauve color, pink, gray down pink. What else do I want to do? I want to add some dark green to these tree shapes, because if I were standing here watching this sunset, I would actually be able to see a little bit more color than is present in my photo. So I'm going to just layer some of the green in there. And then remember there was a very distant kind of mountain, hillside. So I'm going to use a dull grade blue to hint at that distant mountain. I'm going to sneak it behind some of those trees. Now one thing that I want to do, oh here we go, to get rid of the light bits on the paper is I'm going to go ahead and use a blending tool, and I just happen to be using a piece of pipe insulation foam, but really any blending tool that you want to use. And I'm just eliminating these light bits on the paper. Now, what if I didn't do that? I mean, I don't have to do that, but then what ends up happening is as I want to get rid of them, I end up adding a lot of pastel. And the more pastel I add, the more chance I have of making mud. And in the case of these dark trees, it's not going to be as noticeable, but it's just a good habit to get into. And then you can see the tree line, but you don't see the little white bits of paper, which I think are a distraction. Before I move on, I'm not quite done. I realize now that in this set of red rock, there is no Terry Ludwig eggplant. So I'm going to go grab one. Just a second. I'm back. I forgot to put it in here, but this is the eggplant. That's the dark that's in that I have this in my set, but I'm putting it in a few places here. I don't want to put it everywhere because it's very potent. You can see where I added it. That's much darker than the darks that I had used to build up the other layers. And the reason why I didn't put you might say, well, why didn't you put everything that dark? It's a nice dark, it's not black. I could, but then it just wouldn't have as much dimension. It would just look like a dark shape. Whereas here, I have a little bit of feeling of light coming through. All right, I will leave that because I might revisit that one. One thing that looking at the photo, I see that in this ground plane, it was probably a marsh or something like that, so it probably had some browns or golden tones or maybe even some greens. So I'm going to use a dull green to come in here and add just a little bit of color. And one thing that I noticed is right here where I'm going to have the light, it's much lighter. So why don't I add... This is something that I'll probably come and reinforce at the end, but I'm doing it now just because I see it. Sometimes I'll go ahead and put something in so that it reminds me to use it. I probably need to dull down some of these green areas. So I'm using a dark value green. And I have to decide right now, are these is this going to be green grass or golden grass? I'm going to go with the green grass, and that's going to become important in just a minute. Alright, so I have the foreground pretty much in place. I may adjust it some more, I may not, but the reason why I wanted to do it first is because now I have my tree outline, right? That's going to help me determine where my clouds are going to go and where my sky is going to go, and how I'm going to do some negative painting or some sky holes. Alright, so now what? Do I do the sky first or do I do the clouds first? And you could do it either way. Either way works. I think this time I'll go with the sky first. So you can see where I have drawn my cloud shapes lightly. I look at my photo and I see that there's still some blue in the sky, but it's not a bright, sunny blue sky, if you know what I mean. It's kind of a dull gray down sky, and this set is perfect because it's got some kind of gray down blues, moody, a little bit moody blues. So so I'm just using those for the blue areas in the sky. And I'm going near my cloud shapes. What happens in this area is it's no longer blue, it starts to pick up some of the light. And also, as it gets closer to the horizon, the blue becomes much lighter. This might be a little too light, kind of chalky. See that pale blue? So I am going to use this Nupastel to give that a little bit of an adjustment. There's a little too white, kind of like chalk. Okay, what else do we have going on here? We have all the blue in place. There's an interesting thing happening. It looks like there's a very dark kind of violet cloud bank behind the trees. I have a dark blue. I'm going to just lighten that mountain shape a little bit. This is probably too dark. You see when I put it in, it's the squint at it, it's the same value as the trees. So I really can't use that, but I don't have the exact color that I need, so this is where I'm going to have to do some layering to get what I want. So I'm going to start with a violet. I'm going to bring it down and break up the tree shapes. Where does it go? It goes about over to here. Now how can I get it to look blue like that? Why don't I layer some blue over it, and that adjusts it a little bit better, and it works better. So sometimes you don't have the exact pastel. It's okay to layer and create the color that you need. All right, so we've got, this is bothering me. See how chalky that is? I'm gonna get rid of it now while I'm thinking of it. And I also noticed that there's really a lot of light in there, meaning the kind of yellowy, orangey light, which I'm going to, I think I'll put that in now, and the reason why is then I'll know where it goes. So I'm going to start with a peachy color and get rid of that washed out blue that was bothering me. And then I'm going to paint this whole area where the light is coming a little bit darker than I actually want it to end up. So it's actually going to be a little bit brighter, but I'm starting with a darker value of the peach than I really want it to end up. And I'm using it to carve into my tree shapes to get that silhouette interesting. And what did I do? I made 3 soldiers sticking up. So what I'm going to do is change that up a little bit more by adding some more foliage. One thing you have to be careful is sometimes you change one and then you end up changing the other one, and then you just repeated the same issue. That's a little bit better. There we go. Alright, so let's continue with our peach. And it comes up over here, and it's in some of the cloud shapes right in here. Alright, so it's starting to come along. I think I'm going to actually make it even darker. So I have another peach that's a little bit darker. I'm going to go ahead and put that in. And I actually want to stress that there's no formula or right or wrong way to paint clouds or skies. So which is why I wanted to do a demo to show you that there are more than one approaches to it, and a lot of times you just have to look at what you have and kind of be guided by your intuition. I don't know if that makes sense, but if there's that voice that's saying, why don't you go ahead and put that a little bit darker, listen to it, because it's probably giving you good information, and again, it's something that you can always change. what I just did while I was talking was I added in some yellow. So now I have some peaches going on, and I've got some yellow going on. Something now that's I just noticed is this kind of looks like a mountain rather than a cloud bank. So I could do a couple of things. I could say, well, let's make it a mountain, but I think I won't do that. I don't want it to be a mountain. So what I need to do is I need to tone it down a little bit more. So I'm going to take that pale blue hard pastel, kind of blend it over lightly so it starts to blend. And then that kind of integrates it better into the sky. All right, now let's look at the photo and we see that there's some grayish clouds on top of the sky. So let's create those grayish clouds. And the way we're going to do that is we are going to create our own gray. Now, I don't have a gray in this box, but I do have colors that I can mix and make them into gray. So I'm going to use the peach that let's actually use this one. So wherever I see those gray clouds, I'm going to layer some of this peachy orange. I'm using a light touch, and you might be asking, well, why didn't you blend in the sky where you blended in the bottom? And part of the reason is that the gray of the paper is a really nice soft gray, and actually works well as looks like part of the gray of the clouds. So it's working for me. I don't have to blend it in. All right, so on top of those, I'm going to make, this is what I call Technicolor gray. So I start with the peach. I'm going to layer some violet. All right, so now I'm going to lightly layer violet. That's the same value as the peach, and that's the trick for making this work. When you're layering more than one color together to make gray, make sure that they are the same value. If you have a stormy sky, you're going to use a darker value. If you have just light shadows in the clouds, you'll use lighter values. And you can see what's starting to happen when I put the peach or the purple violet on top of the peach. It's starting to get duller or gray down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a green that is the same value, and I'm going to layer that in the areas of gray lightly. And this is just going to enhance the gray feeling or the dulling of the colors. Now, a lot of times I will end up going back and forth using those same colors more than once, you know, enhance those layers. And I'm looking and I see some areas that are actually slightly darker. So this might be too dark. Let's try it. So where I see those clouds as being slightly darker, I'm going to go ahead and put some in. It is too dark. So what am I going to do about that? I'm going to just take the original peach that I used, put it in there, and just tone it back down just a little bit. Alright, so now I'm stepping back and I'm wanting to get this feeling of the clouds swooping in. So I need to start to refine where I have the sky shape and where I have the light. And if I look, I see the light is much brighter, much lighter than I had. And I knew that. That was by design. So I'm going to take a pale yellow, lighter value than I already have down there, and start to pull it up into the sky in this area right here. That's really where the sun sets, so it's much brighter. And it kind of goes over here, and it flows a little bit up into this area here. And a little bit over here. Alright, I've got it too bright right in this area, so I'm going to take that peach. Maybe let's take the yellow. knock it down, and then I realize I need a little bit more of the gray coming in here, so I pick up the violet and break that shape up just a little bit. So it's kind of like when you do sky holes, when you're doing clouds, you are also going to be going back and forth, you know, adding a little cloud color, little gray, little sky color, and go back and forth until it feels right or looks right. And I encourage you that if you're not working from a specific set, that you pick out your pastels in advance and only really work hard at only using that pastels in one set. Otherwise you're going to get crazy with too many colors, and you'll really can overdo it. So pick out your palette in advance, and when you need a new color, think about, can I use something that is already here on my palette? Do I really need to choose a new color? So now what I want to do is, this could be brighter still, but I think I'm going to work on the blue sky holes and start to break up some of these gray clouds. So what did I do? I put it in, put in the sky, put in the clouds, and now I'm kind of coming back with sky color and carving those gray clouds and making them more interesting. And I have to remind myself to step back frequently so that I don't by accident create animals or eyes or faces, right? It's really easy to do. And so you want to step back frequently so that you can evaluate what's happening with your shapes. Right, I can tell you right now what's happening with my shapes. I have this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. They're like fingers. You see that? So what does that mean? What do I have to do? I have to break them up. I have to maybe make this one wider. Break that one up. Maybe I can use a little bit more sky in this one so that it doesn't look like a finger. That's starting to break it up. What about this one? I can add a little more sky back in here so it's not a finger. And that works a little bit better. So if you don't step back enough, you don't see these things starting to happen, and then you wonder why your sky's not working the way you want it to. So that's really important. All right. So this needs to be a little bit brighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and use this pale yellow Nupastel because I have a little bit more control over it. And I'm going to come in, I'm going to carve into this tree. 2 minutes left on this video, on this, oh gosh. Well, that's okay. I'll stop, reevaluate, and then we'll recharge the battery. Not a problem. Why don't we stop right now? I'll recharge the battery and I'll come back and finish. Alright, we're back. And so I'm just carving the light into these tree shapes, and I'm using the side of my pastel, but I'm also creating some linear marks as well. I have to be careful of not creating a halo effect around my trees. So a lot of times when we're adding light at the horizon, we don't pull the light up into the sky enough, and we have this kind of halo of light around our trees. So that's one thing we have to be careful of. Something else that's happening, oops, my finger was wet, that's happening, remember I talked about how the dust will fall on the dark? And you can see that it's happening here. So what am I going to do? I am not going to blow on it. That's the worst thing we can do, because it puts the pastel in the air for us to breathe. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to tap it. And look, by tapping it, giving it a hard tap, all that dust kind of just fell down into my tray. So never blow on it when you see things are getting dusty. Never blow on it. Just give it a whack or tap the top. Okay. I'm going to pick up this peach over here where it's darker. Right over on the right hand side, it's not getting quite as much light. So I'll do that. And then I really want to get the that really light right in here, so I'm going to go in with the lightest pastel that I have just to paint. That's the glow of the light that's just coming from the behind the mountain. And then, which is really cool, let's see if I can get this effect. I gotta have the right color. There's this really bright peach glow right at the horizon, and I don't know if that's going to be the right color or not. Let's start off darker than I want it. And that's just too dark. But now if I come in with the light, I might be able to get that illusion of that light right there at the top of the mountain. I might grab, well, that might work for now. Okay, what else? Alright, so I pretty much have the sky the way I wanted. So now we have to revisit the foreground. Give it another whack, and I'm going to darken it. Something happened here, the pastel didn't quite stick. So let's kind of refresh that. How can you get this illusion of the glow? Well, it's twofold. It's one, it's the colors that you use in the sky, but it's also the value of what's down on the ground. So if you have this dark enough without being black, then the contrast between the light colors in the sky is what's going to give you that glow. So I want to make sure that my darks down here on the foreground are dark enough. And I just gave that tree a funny shape, which I'm trying to get rid of. Yeah, I didn't like the point right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my workable fixative spray and actually, let's darken this a little bit more. I'm going to give it a quick spray, not in the sky. And in fact, if you're worried about your spray getting up in the sky, you can easily put a piece of paper or something up there. But I'm not going to worry about that. Alright, now, while we're waiting for that to dry so that we can give this the finishing touches, the other way that you can really get this glow is if you use some of that bright color that's in the sky. So I'm going to use that peach, and then ever so slightly add a touch of it at the edge of the trees that are touching the sky. It's very subtle, just a little touch here and there of that peach color, just to get the idea of that finishing glow. And then you can also take it and very, very lightly add it to those trees right there at the edge. Because remember, you're still getting a feeling of light kind of spilling over that mountain. Alright, and to finish up this foreground, I'm using that dull army green and just kind of skipping it along where the horizon is, where the tree lines meet, and I'm just softening it with my finger because it's not, that's not where I want you to look. I don't want this to be the most important thing. I want you to go back into the distance and then up into the sky. And I think I'm going to just reinforce that little bit of pale green that I did in the beginning, but I'm just going to put it back in. And I think I took it a little bit further than I wanted. So what do you do to fix that? Just come back with the dark and get rid of that. And actually it feels a little too chalky, so I'm going to add a little violet in there. Press down a little bit harder. This dull violet color is a great color for the light in the foreground because it's not too bright. It's not taking away from the other areas. And then let's go ahead and reinforce this focal area with that eggplant just to darken it a little bit more. Maybe add just some hints of some tree trunks in here. Again, it's not about this foreground stuff. This is This area on this side has been a little bit more neglected. So let me just refine it a little bit without going crazy. Just to give it a little bit more. Where's that mauve-y color? Let's go ahead and break up some of those tree lines right there. And the last thing I'm going to do is come in with a Nupastel and create some linear directional marks just to reinforce this idea of pulling the eye down towards the light. And this is something I will sometimes do in the sky just to give a variety to my mark making. It's not totally necessary. There's some lighter areas in here I might want to reinforce. Oh, that pastel was dirty. This is why I wear a cloth so that I can wipe off my pastels. There we go, we can fix that. And what I would do now is take time to step back and reevaluate, make sure. One other thing, I'm going to just soften the edge right here. Make sure that everything is happening that I want to happen. Just reinforce that light. And yeah, I think that's it. So, review. Clouds. In this case, I wanted the foreground to be dark but not black, so I used multiple layers of color. I wanted to have a variety of marks in the sky. I created my own gray rather than using gray right out of the box. And most important, step back frequently to check your cloud shapes and make sure that they are working and they're not making faces or anything silly. So, I hope you've enjoyed the demo. I hope you have some